Abuse can leave a permanent scar. Domestic abuse is one of the most prominent issues in Armenia, yet silenced by the system and their perpetrators. A resurgence of discussion on gender inequality and women's rights movement has enabled many women to take the step in leaving their relationship. Despite the slow progress of survivors sharing their stories, it is more than steady and determined. To complete the discussion on domestic violence, we must go back in time to the dawn of the women's rights movement in Armenia. By the late 19th century, when Armenia was still in the grips of the Ottoman Empire, women writers flourished in a period of awakening known as Zartok. Girls and boys benefited from the mass education of the Armenian language in western and eastern Armenia. In Constantinople, Armenia's first female novelist, Srpouhi Dussap, managed to write her first novel, Maida, which caused a storm of controversy amongst the male reformers.
Although they supported women's right to facilitate their emancipation, men still took charge of the literary world, unaware of the reformulation that women had taken upon to their hands. The public opinion was often harsh on the female writers and their ideals, since they should keep their opinions to themselves. This attitude expected of women could likewise apply to their families. For unmarried women, using pseudonyms were to protect their modesty and reputation as a way to comply with social conventions. Despite all odds, education, charitable organizations, the journals, salons organized by women, and the theater all made the movement accessible to the public.
However, traditions followed in Armenian families have not changed so much. In a few remote villages, generations of Armenian women were forced into chilkhoskanutun, a culturally enforced practice of silent keeping. Married women could only communicate in their sign language, harsneren, to show a form of respect to their husband and the female relatives. The movement did not reach rural areas as effectively, and with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the once promising vision of equality vanished into thin air. By the time of Stalin's death, Armenia had already been a part of the Soviet Union for more than 2 decades. Female writers from early generations were largely ignored, never taught in schools, and never canonized publicly.
Their pioneering thoughts on committing to equal rights and reshaping gender norms became less relevant to the public. At a time when many Armenian women did not feel empowered enough through the lack of representation, family education became the key influence in developing their self-identity. Although certain improvements were made to advance women's social status, including efforts done in access to voting, education, health, employment, deep down, the gender stereotypes were prevalent in households.
The Soviet philosophy fostered a resistance to feminism and degraded the movement to counter the influence of Western beliefs on gender equality. It comes to no surprise then that upon the fall of the Soviet Union, the traditional gender roles reappeared and intensified around Armenia. The spare employment available enforced the idea of men working away and relegating women to household duties, so they may occupy available jobs. Men remained patriarchs and heads of the family, while women were expected to be passive and submissive in the households. In public, no one ever expects anyone to discuss domestic violence, sexual abuse, and other forms of topic because they were completely taboo. A discussion about it will be an attempt to destroy the family, and even worse, most people would deny the victims, the women, from gaining their justice. We traveled to Yerevan earlier in 2020 to visit one of the most secure shelters for survivors of domestic abuse.
But if this, we're now at the Women's Support Center Armenia, and we're going to talk to workers of the center and ask them about what the center is doing and how do they feel.
To reach out to the Women's Support Center, survivors can call their hotline and ask for any help if necessary. They provide assistance from social workers, psychologists, and lawyers training courses for professionals, and most importantly, act as a refuge for safety for the women and children escaping from abuse.
Despite the law stating that men and women are equal, the Armenian government has not been the most eager in resolving gender discrimination. Back in 1997, when the Prime Minister tried to launch the 3-year gender policy development program, it only fell apart due to the shortage of funds. Fast forward to 2018, Armenia has signed the critical Istanbul Convention in combating violence against women, but it has not been ratified yet. Although we've seen an improvement in Armenia's global inequality index, dropping from 0.468 in 2000 to 0.262 in 2017, domestic abuse remains persistent when the nation has to preserve the good values of traditions. In one survey done, a staggering 95.5% of male respondents report that they exhibit controlling behavior, which is a basic characteristic of domestic abuse.
At the center, we managed to sit down with one anonymous survivor as she shared her story with us.
I got married at the age of 27. We were not friends or lovers, we just got acquainted in a very short time. I got married, and 1 week into married life, I realized it wasn't the family I could live in. I didn't have a mother-in-law, his mom was dead, so we were living with his father. And his 2 sisters were also married. However, they always liked to interfere in the family, starting from the household. They always allowed themselves to interfere with their brother's family.
Եղել է բռնություն էին տեսակ, որ հարվածներ իմ դեմքին ու իմ երեխաների
They have hit me in the face, in front of my 2 underage children. They consider this very normal. I didn't think about myself, but my children's mental pressure that had been ever present. My children didn't live happily in that house because he, as a father, wasn't a loving one, and his father had an unbearable nature. If my ex-husband did not talk to me, my children were nothing to him.
In December 2017, the domestic violence law passed in Armenia. It is considered a milestone for the nation to restore peace in the family unit, but its framework does not fully protect the girls and women more vulnerable to abuse. Many acts that constitute domestic violence under the Istanbul Convention do not apply under Armenian law. For example, if the perpetrator does not meet the legal threshold of battery, he will not be committing a crime then. The law also emphasizes on the reconciliation of the family, which is unacceptable under international practices, as the victim will be left without any protection from the abuser. According to the UNFPA in 2016, every 5th marriage in Armenia ended in divorce due to physical violence of wife beating. Divorce rate increased 20% between 2013 and 14, showing that psychological and emotional suffering can be unbearable.
Իսկ այն չեք կարծում, գյուղական տարածքներում մարդկանց փորձը խնդրի հետ տարբեր է քաղաքում բնակվող մարդկանց փորձից։
Statistically speaking, Yerevan, the capital, is not very different from rural areas. The interesting point is that there are regional characteristics within Armenia. The regions from where people address us are mainly Jegakunik, Kotek, Ararat, Armavir, these regions, where the cases are always comparably higher than the rest of the country. It is very interesting that in Vyotsta there were no cases reported for years, but it's been a year that there is an NGO functioning, people have started to speak up. Before that, it seemed like there were no cases of domestic violence in that region, or people just kept silent in general.
This increasing act of speaking up can benefit the women from leaving their households. If we look into Article 6 of Domestic Violence Law, it states that if the victim no longer feels safe around the perpetrator, they can issue an emergency intervention order. However, it will only come into effect once the perpetrator is notified and offers the signed acknowledgement. This clearly violates the Istanbul Convention, which provides for the issuance of an emergency barring order ex parte with immediate effect, under Articles 52 and 53, meaning that the law enforcement can prioritize to protect the victims by telling the perpetrators to leave the residence right on spot. It goes into effect right away and does not stall like the current procedure in Armenia. Right now, the domestic violence law does not provide any detail on monitoring the police to enforce these protection orders.
When I was pregnant with my first child, I, as every woman, was busy with the household chores. I asked him if my mom could come over and help me, because she never came often, she didn't have that right. When my mom was about to arrive, my father-in-law told me that he was going to scare my mom away. I asked how? He said he was going to hide me in his workplace and rape my mom. I said what? He said yes. I told him to never allow himself to ever say these words to my mom, because she was a saint. My mom said, "What?" He told my mom the exact account and how he planned to rape her. My mom froze. She said, "What are you allowing yourself to do?" She stood up to him.
Let's take a look at Armenian respondents' attitude toward rape and violence in an UNFPA study. When asked, a woman should tolerate violence in order to keep her family together, 44.6% of men and only 27.8% of women agreed to the statement. Male respondents are often more inclined to keep the family together. Next, when a woman is raped, she usually did something to put herself in that situation. 40.9% of men agreed, whereas 24.2% of women said the same. Generally speaking, this joke from our survivor's father-in-law could reflect the underlying sentiment of justifying rape and violence as a way of thinking.
In addition to the tolerance against abuse, we have been raised based on the stereotype that abusing women is something normal and we need to tolerate it.
Sadly, the current Armenian criminal code does not define the acts that the perpetrator may carry out to inflict mental suffering in Article 119, making it hard to convict them based on any abusive and controlling pattern. In this TED Talk, Alina Sanamian points out a clear truth about gender inequality in the country.
It turns to me that when it comes to my private space, such as family, home, and relatives, I was expected to take responsibility for a number of things. But what came to my public space, such as friends or seeking a job and making a career, it was seen as unacceptable for me to take charge of such things. You would now ask, what was the problem? Okay, firstly, why should a young lady work at that age when she's only expected to get concentrated on her lessons and then get married and have children? I do not want to say that it was forced upon me, but it wasn't even discussed with me either. It was seen as the natural flow of things. Furthermore, why should a young lady be out of the house in the evening as it was a night shift? Not a common behavior for a traditional Armenian young lady.
As of now, in the thousands of domestic violence cases, not a single perpetrator has been imprisoned other than reasons of murder or stabbing. In fact, a perpetrator can easily receive a light sentence, usually a fine, when they commit murder or injury out of temporary insanity, according to Articles 105 and 114, because the victim could have mocked or insulted the person. The murder of Diana Nakhapetian, stabbed 21 times by her husband in front of her two pubescent daughters, is just one of the latest cases that showcase such judicial bias in trial. We must understand that for years of abuse, perpetrators can also walk away in freedom, facing only slight repercussions.
Նշեցիք, որ կանայք ունեն ապաստան, որը տրամադրվում է ձերիս կողմից։ Կարող եք նշել ինչքանով է ապաստանը ապահով կանանց համար։
There were cases when the abuser had found the shelter and reached the entrance of the shelter, but was not able to proceed as the security had eliminated them from the area in a matter of seconds. This also proves that every woman who addresses us is safe, in terms of information privacy. Also, to guarantee their safety, as we can overcome the traumas that built up over years in this environment.
Many like-minded NGOs spread across Armenia can agree that substantial change requires time and effort. Right now, domestic violence is subject to public persecution, but on a human level, there's a lot of informal encouragement to reconcile going on in the law system. Officials can pressure the survivors with the victim blaming and gender stereotypes to settle the case. What's more, if the judge finds the case easy to resolve, the court has the right to refer it to mediation in 4 hours without parties' agreement. Although much injustice happens on the blind side, survivors should always know that they have ways to find help.
To be an Armenian woman means that they are often more blackthorns than laurels on the path towards social justice and gender equality. Out of the many issues the Armenian society faces, domestic violence turns out to be the one that stings right at heart like a blackthorn.
These thorns are in many Armenian families, unplucked, untreated, and unheard of.
You know we will have the solution after putting a lot of effort into change within each generation and their mindsets. Of course, this will only happen if we start from education, can overcome stereotypes and conduct legislative changes. If we work solely on one dimension, we will not reach our objective.
Միանշանակ համաձայնում ձեզ հետ։ Իսկ եթե ինչ-որ անձնավորություն այնպիսի դրության մեջ է, երբ աջակցության կարիք ունի, ինչը կլինի առաջին քայլը ձեր կողմից կամ ձեր կազմակերպության կողմից։
Տեսեք առաջի քայլը
The first step from us is that we have a 24-hour emergency number in which they can call at any time of the day, be it day or night, and receive support from a professional telling them what to do or not, so that the survivor's life is not threatened. It also includes how to escape from the abuser safely, what steps to take, where to go, and so on. Or, if they know our address, they can come directly to us where our social worker supports the woman as an advisor to find solutions.
When the survivor shared her story, we can hear in her voice to no longer tolerate fear and agony.
Իսկ ձեր նախկին ամուսինը հիմա հնարավորություն ունի տեսնել երեխաներին ու կամ ընդհանրապես հանդիպել է, ինչ բաժանվել եք դուք արդեն։
Անկեղծ ասած, ես նորից ունեցել եմ։
To be honest, I had a conversation with him a year ago. He told me that he did not want to see the children as he might feel bad, and he said it would be better for him if he doesn't meet the children. This was his point of view, and he did not want meetings with the children. There were times when I called him. And to be honest, there were also times when he wanted to take my son with him, so I let him, but as my children didn't want to go themselves, I did not force them.
She made her stance clear and plucked away the blackthorns that were ever persistent in her family. Sometimes to leave requires even more courage to stay. As she walks away with her children to start the next chapter of their lives, it is a journey that will bring them far with hope. Hey guys, thanks for watching. This film is made possible by the Changemaker Project and Yerevan Diligent College for their generous aid, Women's Support Center in Armenia for their dedicated work in eliminating domestic violence in the nation. Donate and support the center right now.